Persuasion is not a dirty word. Persuasion is a tool that we use in order to do things that they might not want to do in the first place. When you talk about deception or you talk about ethics, the doctor is just as persuading you as much as the car salesman is, right? But we don't necessarily think about it that way.
Welcome to High Octane Leadership with Donald Thompson. This season, we're diving deeper with more solo episodes, where I'll share the experiences that have led to recognition by EY, Forbes, Fast Company, and others. Not as a boast, but as milestones on my entrepreneurial path. From growing multi-million-dollar firms to successful business exits and building high-performance teams with a global perspective. I'll reveal the insights and strategies from my journey and share them with you so that we can win together. Alongside these solo episodes, we'll have industry visionaries and thought leaders, and we'll explore effective leadership. Ready to empower your leadership journey with real success stories? Let's embark on this transformational journey together. Hello, and welcome to another episode of High Octane Leadership. I'm your host, Donald Thompson. I'm joined today by Dr. J.C. Abdallah, a quantitative researcher who studies the intersection of sports, media, and fan identification. His dissertation examined how NFL and college football fans engage with social media. A Pittsburgh native and a passionate Steelers and Penguins fan, Dr. Abdallah teaches courses in sports communication, persuasion, and mass communication. JC, welcome to the show, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
As one of the things as we dive in, and also want to share with our audience that my creative partner and good friend Bob Batchelor is on the line also. And so I've got 2 Ph.D.s and DT hanging out together. And so Bob and I are going to drive the questioning and the conversation, but we're very, very interested in this topic, whether it's the world of sports, politics, pop culture, of really understanding that how do we make decisions? How are we persuaded? How are we moved and manipulated across these different things? And so, JC, one of the things I'm going to start with as we jump out, and I got a chance to meet you when I was at Coastal Carolina talking with some of the mass communication students, and we chopped it up for about an hour and a half in the cafeteria, just catching it. You kind of stick out at Coastal Carolina University for a very specific reason. Like, what's part of your brand within the organization that audience would want to know a little bit about you?
For me, it's pretty simple. So I take what I do to an extreme. I essentially live and breathe what I do. I am a Steelers fan through and through. I'm really a Pittsburgher. It's one of the things where I want everybody to know where I'm from because I'm so proud of where I am from. It's one of the things that is so key to who I am. It's part of my experience. It's part of my understanding of what the world is because, again, it's how we learn from our experiences as kids, the world around us. And my living and breathing in Pittsburgh for my entire life until I moved away, you have this feeling of this identity. So I have this feeling of, I don't want anybody to see me. I don't want a stranger to cross the street and see me and not know that I am from Pittsburgh, right? Like, that's how I kind of feel about this because it's one of the things where it's like, it's a great conversation starter, especially here in Myrtle Beach, because there are so many Pittsburghers, so many people from Western Pennsylvania down here. And it's one of the things where it's part of my trademark. It's funny because I had class yesterday and I had a student ask me in my sports comm class, she said, I don't think I've ever seen you wear anything anything that isn't a Steelers shirt. How many Steelers shirts do you have? And I said, I don't know, about 70. And she said, what? And I said, oh yeah, that's not counting the jerseys either. And I said, it's one of the things where it's like, that's just who it is. That's who I am. And that's kind of why I stick out here because it's one of the things where, I don't know, everybody kind of has their own trademark. And when you stick to it and it becomes who you are, as long as you're fine with it, there's nothing wrong with it. And it's funny because that's who I want to be. It's not anybody who I don't want to be, right? I'm so happy with the fact that people know me as that Steelers professor, right? Like, that's kind of the point.
That is good stuff. One of the things you shared during my visit that I'd love for you to talk about with the audience and unpack a little bit is, yes, you're a Steelers fan. Yes, that's a part of your identity. Yes, you want people to recognize that. Talk about the family underpinning of being a Steelers fan, how that connected with you and important people in your life. I'd love to share with the audience because that's going to lead us down the path of what creates this connection and community. But I'd love to hear it in your voice and in your story.
I think one of the biggest things that we do as sports fans is understand that it's something that's bigger than us. It's something that we can share with other people. It's something that we can really have a great connection with other people, no matter what. It's one of the things where I think about my story. My story is kind of interesting because my dad was an immigrant from Jordan. He moved to this country when he was 18 years old. I've always heard the story of when he moved to the country, he didn't understand football. He didn't like football for years. And he moved to Pittsburgh, still didn't like the Steelers for a very long time. This was also during the 1980s where they weren't not the greatest. So, I could understand that a little bit. And of course, he never saw football before he came to this country either. So, he didn't understand it. And then he had an accident at work. He had a workplace accident where he just kind of wanted to, he was at home recovering. He didn't want to watch anything funny. He didn't really want to be sad. He just kind of wanted to do something else. He wanted to be in another place. He wanted to escape. And it was 1995 and the Steelers were really good at the time. We were going to the Super Bowl at the time. And my dad watched the Super Bowl and the run up to it and became a fan because it was just, that's what he did on Sundays because he couldn't do anything else. He couldn't go to work. He couldn't do anything else. Right. So, and I think the reason that story is it's the reason it starts off like that is because, I was a little kid when that happened and I wanted to spend time with my dad. I didn't necessarily know anything about football. Again, you're 3 years old. Sports fanship doesn't really start until around 5 or 6. You don't necessarily get it, but you want to hang out with your dad. And what's the best way of doing that than on Sundays, 3 hours on Sundays? What other event can give you unfettered 3 hours with a great family member? It's kind of one of those things where it makes me feel like I'm connected to him in that way. And that's kind of where this starts, this community of feeling of just our relationship with people around us and something that we can share with everybody. And our family is something that is massively important to that. And it's especially important in areas, we can talk about this later, but I think I mentioned this before. You think about the areas of where you had to have family, you had to have these connections because life was pretty hard. The Rust Belt, you think about Buffalo, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Chicago, Detroit, all of these places have really great fan bases for good reason. It's because it connects those towns, it connects those cities with those people. Because if you think about it, those are diehard fans for good reason.
And I want to add something or extend to what you were saying, JC, that's powerful. You talked about sharing an experience with your family member, and that's where it started. And then that becomes a shared experience with other people that are part of that community. And the thing that I want to tie together, that shared experience, that escape, because life's pretty hard. And so I'd ask this question, and then Bob, you chime in wherever you like. I'm so excited I can just go question. But what is fandom? And then why is it so important for non-academics or business people to understand in terms of building community, building momentum for your brand, things of that nature?
Fandom's about identification. It's about being able to identify with something that is personal to you, is very somewhat of a connection to you, right? Like you have some sort of association with it. So I think fandom is something that allows us to escape, right? It allows us that ability to be in another environment, be in another world where we don't necessarily have to think about, our everyday issues or everyday problems. And I always think about this in terms of sports. If you think about sports, you think about it, if you watch football, for example, because again, I'm such a football guy. I always think about it in football terms. There's 168 hours of the week. Football happens 3 hours out of 168 hours. What happens that other 165 hours? What else do you do with it? You talk to people. You talk about the game. You talk about the team. You talk about the future. And that conversation with other people alone is worth the price of admission for fanship because, again, it's that feeling of connection. I'm going to go to a store today and I'm going to wear a Steelers shirt, and somebody's going to ask me today, I guarantee it, is Aaron Rodgers going to play on Sunday? Because it's one of the things that allows us to be like, hey, you know what? I'm going to be able to talk to that person. I'm going to be able to connect with that person in some way, in some manner. And fandom allows us to do that. And that's kind of that escape that allows us to do that, for those 165 hours. But even if you think about other types of fandom, and yeah, Bob, maybe you can talk about this as well. If you think about things like comic books or things like Harry Potter, why do you think Harry Potter is such a big fandom? Because it's one of the things where it's literally an entire universe where you can escape to. We literally have theme parks to escape to this magical world. And it's very similar. It kind of has a very similar mechanism behind it. We want to see ourselves as that superhero. That's why we like Spider-Man. That's why we like superhero. That's why we like Superman, right? We want to see ourselves in that area, right? We kind of want to escape to that. And I think sports and entertainment is kind of the same thing. It's a great way of looking at it. And again, that's why I think it's such a builder of community, right? It doesn't matter what it is. If you like something and I like something, we can spend 8 hours talking about it. That's all that it takes.
I would definitely say that there's something to the communities, especially the big cities in the Rust Belt. If you look at the most intense fans, you have Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Detroit, Cincinnati. These are places where three of us, one thing we share in common, we've all spent a significant time in Pittsburgh. So we know the entire region, you draw a circle 100 miles from Pittsburgh, that region lives and dies with what happens on Sunday. And you can feel it. Monday morning, if you go to work in downtown Pittsburgh and the Steelers lost, or Steelers lose on a last-second field goal, oh my God, downtown Pittsburgh is crying. You can feel it in the air and deflated. And people aren't recovering. They take them 3 days to recover. I've lived in Cleveland. It's the same feeling in Cleveland. It's pretty amazing. And we all who grew up in Pittsburgh checkbox parts of our lives based on what the Steelers. The first football game I ever saw was Super Bowl IX. I was 6 years old. First football game I ever saw, Steelers go to Super Bowl. And I know significant, I don't follow the Steelers that much anymore, but I can chart my childhood to what was happening with the Steelers. Back in the 80s, when J.C. said the Steelers were so-so, when I was in college at Pitt, Bubby Brister used to hang out in the same bars that I hung out. So I've sat down and talked smack with him for hours. And he and I had nothing in common except he was a Steeler. He's a hero. Guy was a hero. Yager's first year, his rookie year, is same thing. So it's an amazing thing. And then you have the explosion of technology. So if I say, and the listeners might laugh at this, I would bet we all know what a furry is. I'm not going to ask anybody if they participated, but you know what it is. You know why? Because the internet, things like eBay, it allowed everybody's fandom and the little intense communities, cult-like communities they used to be involved with, it all brought it out into the open. So you can collect anything now. You can connect with other people via the internet. Everything's wide open. And so that's why what J.C. does is so important, because the sports identity and community that he's studying, it transcends everybody's life.
J.C. and Bob, thanks for that. What I'm hearing consistently is that shared experience, that escape, that whether it's Harry Potter, whether it's sports, different things. What's the difference between a fan and a super fan? What jumps to that level? If you think about a fan, right? If you think about what a fan can be, and I teach my students that there's kind of 3 levels of fans. You kind of have these fans who are, you can think about them in layman's terms as low, medium, high. The low involves fans. Generally, they may follow them in terms of checking box scores, or they might watch games with their friends. Then you have fans who, do watch every game. They tend to be involved. But these super fans that I'm talking about, and again, it's easy for me to talk about it because I am one. These are the people who, it's not the 3 hours that I'm talking about. It's the 165 other hours of the week that they think about this team. It's not just that I am a fan of this team. When you become a super fan, the team is a part of me. That is the difference between a fan and a super fan. It is no longer the fact of I am a part of the team's fan community. It's the fact that the team is literally a part of who I am as a person. It becomes part of your self-concept. When you talk about your identity as who you are,
I am X, I am Y, I am Z. I'm a Steelers fan. I'm from Pittsburgh. It's part of who you are. It becomes that inner part of you. Quick story about my dad real quick. He had scars from his surgery in his arm. And he didn't like the scars. He wanted to cover them up with tattoos. And he was like, what is something where I need two symbols that can symbolize who I am as a person, or something that is very important to me as a person, right? As an immigrant, he chose a bald eagle because he came to America looking for a better life, which he did. And he chose the Steelers logo. That's because that's who he was. And that's who we were. And it's one of the things where it's not just that you're able to wear a shirt, it's that you're wearing it on your body for the rest of your life. That's the difference between a fan and a super fan.
And JC, in the world of politics, it's all about persuasion. In the world of business, you're trying to create identity with your client to where they have that same feeling of the brand. Transition a little bit with me to some of the things you're teaching your students about how to think about creating these communities, sustaining that brand voice. What are some of the things in terms of persuasion that our leaders that are listening could help them be better at their jobs of creating communities, creating connection with their clients or their constituents or things of that nature?
It's funny because one of the biggest things that I say in persuasion, and I say it's like, listen, if you never learn a single thing in this class, you have to learn this. You never move your audience to your message, you move your message to your audience. You have to find a way to make that message resonate with your audience. You cannot force your audience to come to you. You have to go to them. The thing is that particularly when it comes to persuasion, a lot of people want to push, not necessarily extreme, but you're thinking about, you want to push one thing or another. And a lot of people are not willing to meet people, not even halfway. But one of the biggest things here is you have to give your audience some sort of ability to understand your message. They have to be motivated to understand your message. If they're not motivated, if they can't understand it, you're not going to be able to get them on your side. You have to be able to move your message to your audience. That's the biggest thing. Like it's the fact of, if I'm teaching 25 18-year-olds, I'm going to have to teach it in a different way than if I'm teaching 18 65-year-olds. Like the way that I have to approach material has to be different based upon who these people are. And that's why it's so important to know who your audience is and know what is important to them. Where are they from? What's their experience like? This is kind of a different thing. And I'm going to talk about teaching real quick because I really think this is important in pedagogy. And I think this is important in everything else. The biggest thing that I do the first day of class is I have an introduction form that my students fill out. Who are you? And it's not just who you are. I want to know where you're from. I want to know, what is your dream career? What are you going for? Like, what do you really want to do? What's your favorite team? What's your favorite TV show? What's something that you think that is interesting about you that people don't know about? I want to know you as a person so I can adjust my message to the people in my audience. Again, if I have a whole bunch of people from Western Pennsylvania, I might be able to say one thing or another that can resonate to them in a way that might not resonate with other people, but allows them to remember something. Or if I have an ability to understand, hey, this person or a lot of my students in this class really like a certain TV show or a certain movie or something like that, then I can adjust, maybe tip that off a little bit. But just knowing about who your audience is important because you have to move your message to them. You have to know your audience and you have to know what they want to hear. If they're not motivated, if they're not able to understand you, you're not going to be able to get them on your side. Plain and simple.
Bob, did you have something?
I think it's one of the fundamentals whenever I think about messaging, whether it's for an organization or whatever you're trying to achieve. You want to communicate clearly, you want to know your audience, and you want to know what distribution channels do they want to be communicated to. So it's not just blasting messages out to everybody in the world. It's making sure that It's like some people don't want to be communicated with Facebook, media channel. So being able to know your audience to the point where you can communicate with them via the right channel, you're going to be doing a better job. And knowing them well enough, at Workplace Options, for example, we weren't on the front end of psychological safety. We were more on the front end of inclusive leadership, but we knew that those messages would generate interest with our audience. And so we went all in. Like if we had poker chips, we were all in on those two factors because we understood the audience and we had something interesting to say. So then that took two pieces off the equation, and we just had to figure out where were the best channels. And we went then all in on LinkedIn and grew the company LinkedIn from under 25,000 to 150,000 and grew the newsletter from 0 to 50,000 subscribers. So a lot of the ways that JC is looking at community building, and particularly in sports, directly applicable to the way that communicators and C-suite leaders should be thinking about messaging across the board.
One of the things, and this is for Bob and JC, like you use the word persuasion, and I'll come back to that for a minute. Depending on how the context, right? Persuasion could feel manipulative. You're moving somebody into a cult. Persuasion could be manipulative. I'm trying to sell you a car that's a lemon used car. Or persuasion could be, I'm motivating you to be your best self. I'm giving you the tools and the tactics, right? That you can think bigger. How do you think about persuasion and the ethical components of knowing these things and building these communities? And what have you seen, for and against people using these in the right and wrong ways?
Persuasion is a very big umbrella term, and I think it's really important that a lot of people remember that. Persuasion is not a dirty word. Persuasion is a tool that we use in order to do things that other people may not, to get people to do things that they might not want to do in the first place. When you think about what persuasion is, it is literally getting people to do things that they're not already doing, something that they're not doing, something they don't want to do because they're not already doing it. So you kind of have to give them to do something. In that sense, it is kind of a little, murky about what is deception versus what is persuasion, what is indoctrination versus what is brainwashing, what is compliance gaining. How do you change things? And again, it's like, are you changing a behavior? Are you trying to get them to comply? That's compliance gaining. Are you trying to change an opinion? Are you trying to change an attitude about something?
JC, back to what you just said before. You said compliance gaming?
Compliance gaining, yeah. So you gain compliance from somebody else. It's one of the things where persuasion is art and a science. I think of it in terms of this way. When you talk about deception or you talk about ethics, when you think about persuasion, I ask my students, do you think of that sleazy car salesman who's like selling snake oil? That's exactly what you think of when you think of somebody who's using persuasion for a negative way, right? But you never think about it in terms of your doctor trying to tell you, hey, listen, you should adjust your diet because you're overweight, or you need to adjust your something else because something else is happening, right? The doctor is just as persuading you as much as the car salesman is. But we don't necessarily think about it that way. We think about it in terms of we're getting advice. We're getting something from a higher authority. It's all about understanding what that message is. Again, it's not trying to be negative. It should never be a bad thing. And I think a lot of people have that misconception. It's so negative when it comes to persuasion because we think about things like indoctrination. We think about things like brainwashing. We think about things like coercion, for example. Now, listen, if you don't have the free will of saying no, that's no longer persuasion. You're not persuading somebody. And I think we can understand that's a negative. You have to meet certain criteria in order for something to be considered to be persuasion. If not, then it's something else because that's not what we're talking about. And I think a lot of people, especially my students, when they come out of my class, they say, I didn't understand that persuasion was so many different things. And I tell them on the first day, it's 100 different things, but it's the same thing at the same time. It's so weird. It's like a paradox.
Well, what does that mean? Look, okay, because I'm not an academic, right? So if you say it's 100 different things and then it's the same thing at the same time, I'm like, what?
So if you're trying to gain, if you're coercing somebody, and you're not giving them the option of saying no. And then at the same time, you are giving them the option of saying no. It's kind of the same mechanism, but there's something different about it. And it's those little differences. That's what makes it different. It's those little different things that talk about it. And again, I talk about it as persuasion being a science and an art. There's a science to it. It's not necessarily a mathematical formula, but there's things that if you want something to be done correctly, you have to do it this way. If you do it incorrectly, you're going to have a very bad time trying to get people on your side.
So here's the thing, back to fandom a little bit, and I'll let you both jump in. So I'll use the Dallas Cowboys as an example. So Dallas Cowboy fan. Every year they think they're going to the Super Bowl, and every year they raise in valuation of what the club is worth, but they're actually super average all the time. But their fans always believe this is our year. But the behavior of their organization, the way they draft, the way they pay players, it's not a well-run football organization. It's a well-run marketing organization, right? But their fans are total believers. How do you build that kind of sustained enthusiasm in spite of facts, right? Like, in spite of data, in spite of facts. They're all in, man, buying merchandise and shit.
Jerry Jones is a shrewd businessman. So when he bought the Cowboys in 1989, he bought the Cowboys for 140, 150, 160 million, somewhere around that area. Okay. They're worth $13 billion right now. That is a 9,000% return on investment. Part of the reason that Jerry Jones was able to make that team worth so much money, and a lot of people actually don't know this, so this is actually a little bit different. When the NFL made the merchandising apparel back in the late 90s, they had the teams sign a contract. 27 of those teams signed it. The 28th team was the Dallas Cowboys, and Jerry Jones was like, I'm not going to give you any part of this money. So I'm just going to merchandise my own money, or I'm just going to merchandise my own merchandise. And that's exactly what he did. So the Cowboys, for a very long time, it was really funny. I believe this happened I don't know if he still owns it or not. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe this was through the Reebok era, at least, where you could have there would be 31 different styles of the same shirt. And then the only one that wasn't available was the Cowboys. They would have the different style because it was the Jerry Jones one. It was almost all 32 teams available except for the Cowboys because of Jerry Jones. Because again, that's the shrewd business portion of it. You're talking about the Dallas Star. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. People know what that is. You want to talk about brand. That's an incredible brand. The Dallas Star itself is worth, if you put a net worth to a brand logo, that's probably the number one right there because it's so recognizable. It's so funny. And here's the other thing too. It's such a generic star, but everybody knows what it is because they're so good at marketing that brand. I wanted to mention something really quick in terms of the Cowboys. It's not Jerry Jones. This kind of started in the 70s. And it starts with how we understand why people are fans of certain teams. And I want to talk about the Cowboys and the Steelers in the 1970s, because the way that we understand why are Steeler fans so big? Why are Cowboys fans why are they everywhere? Well, it starts in the 1970s. It starts with media. It starts with how we understand and recognize these brands, right? The more that we see it, the more it's in front of our eyeballs, the more that we're able to affiliate with it, the more that we become loyal to it. The Cowboys and the Steelers were always on TV in the 1970s. If you ask anybody who was a fan of football, and maybe wasn't necessarily a big family fan, born in the 60s or 70s, they're going to say they're probably a Steelers or Cowboys fans. Later on, you can kind of see the shift to the Niners, to the Cowboys again in the 90s. If you think about it in terms of things like baseball, this is actually a really important thing that I tell my students, because a lot of people, again, they're young. They don't necessarily remember the time of the Ted Turner TBS Atlanta Braves and the WGN-led Chicago Cubs, where you could see those games nationally. You didn't have to be in the local market. You could see the Braves, you could see the Cubs. And it led to an explosion of Braves and Cubs fans all over the place in the 1990s and early 2000s. It's about getting your logo in front of eyeballs. That's all it is. It's about getting people to recognize who you are, because knowing is half the battle. We say that with a lot of things, but that's true with everything.
It always takes time. And Don and I, we've had this conversation for 5 years. I think you could boil down everything down to awareness. And CEOs look to their CMO and they want fast results. Like, why aren't we in front of XYZ? My thinking is always like, how long you got? Because unless you're already a name brand, and if you're not known by either by looking at the logo or a single name, like you're Jordan, Beyonce, Microsoft, if you're not that, everything's an awareness game for you, because your audience is so diluted and so bombarded with 1,000, 100,000 messages each day. If you're going to build awareness, you're going to have to be dedicated. You're going to have to be committed to the long term. And the CMO is the quickest in and out of the C-suite of all the C-suite leaders, because the boss wants things now and wants it fast. And marketing is not a fast game. It's decades. And most companies don't realize that.
Bob, I would add to that, and I took this note while you were talking, right? If you want to build fast results, it's going to take a long time. If you're going to do it well. I remember Grant Willard a few years back. Grant's my mentor, very good friend, and really gave me my break in the software business many, many years ago. And I'm forever indebted to him for that. A couple of years ago, he said, Don, if you watch this Netflix series, Drive to Survive. And I was like, no. He said, it's about F1. And I was like, what's that? And I was like, no, haven't watched it. What's that? Don't care. And then he was like, no, you need to watch this. And I said, why do I need to watch cars riding around a track? And he says, it's not about that. He said, it's about the teamwork. It's about there's only 20 of these chairs in the world. It's about it's the fastest growing. So he changed the narrative about what I was negative about to what would be my hook is about the teamwork. How do you get a car in and out, right, of a pit stop in under 3 seconds? I was like, what? And so now I watched this Drive to Survive season 1, season 2, season 3. I'm now falling in love with these characters. And then 5 years later, I spend a lot of money. And I go to my wife and youngest daughter, Diana, we went to our first F1 event in Mexico City. I now am a part of that cycle. I have a Ferrari hat because Hamilton now drives for Ferrari. I've got an F1 cap. I've got an F1 shirt. So now I'm a part of the merchandising system, the fan system, and now part of that community and excited about those things. And I think that, Bob, to your point that you're always trying to do is like, yes, you can have speed in brand building or community building, but really you have to have a long-term thesis, a long-term thought process for the kindling to catch. And everybody's wanting the fire to catch, but you have to actually build the foundation. Then you can put some kindling on the foundation, and then that thing can catch, but then you get that brand loyalty.
Yeah, and the kindling, the only way to catch fast now is there has to be a transcendent person or thing happen. For F1, it was this Netflix series. In music, it was the emergence of Taylor Swift. You never could have guessed that. Her early part of her career, you could never guess where she is now. So it's Jordan essentially carrying the torch and taking the NBA even further. Now, football's been so good at marketing for so long, it had a jump start. So how do you do that in a B2B realm? It takes a lot of money. I've been in different places. Why aren't we thought of in the same light as McKinsey? And I'm like, McKinsey spent, how much money collectively has McKinsey spent marketing itself? Okay, give me $150 million and we'll reach that fast. You got $150 million? Because they have decades. Like, just look, 30 best-selling business books. Probably, if you took the top 50 best-selling business books of all time, a McKinsey person's been probably behind 20 of them. You can't buy that fast unless you have a lot of money.
Now, what you can do faster in a B2B context is realize what will have long-term value for building community and fans. For McKinsey, it was the sharing of knowledge and expertise. So they were one of the forefront leaders is sharing through thought leadership, documenting their process and creating that McKinsey way. And they invested in that sharing, which then raised their credibility so they could charge premium prices. And when I think about the sports analogies and different things, nothing to do with being a fan in professional sports is cheap.
Not anymore. It's funny. I literally was talking about commodification of sport yesterday with my students. And I had mentioned the NFL and the throwbacks and all of these things of like, okay, we're going to come out with these jerseys, the color rush jerseys, these throwbacks, these alternate jerseys. And I'm just sitting here just thinking to myself, I'm really going to have to spend another $150 on this jersey. Like, come on, man. So, but that's the thing. They get me. The day that Aaron Rodgers jersey was available on that Steelers website, I bought it. The day that when I went back home, I was like, I need to get one of the throwback jerseys, the 1933 jerseys. And I said to myself, I'm going to get it. It doesn't matter. Like, it's part of my drive. And here's the other thing too. I always think about it this way. And here's kind of go back to what you had mentioned when you say it takes a long time for this loyalty for brands. We're talking about sports fans who have been sports fans for almost their entire lives. When I talk about what I'm going through, the way that I do things, the way that I make my purchase decisions, the way that I do things based upon me being a Steelers fan, that's me being a Steelers fan for decades. And it's really important to remember that when you think about things like brand loyalty, for example, it starts when you're a kid. That's why companies market to kids. You try to get them early because that's how you get lifelong brand. I mean, that's really what it is. You get kids to start thinking, hey, Jordans look good, Nikes are good. Then you're like, okay, you have your parents, can I buy Nikes? Can I buy Jordans? And then when you're an adult, you're like, well, I guess I'll buy Nikes now. And that's kind of the point. It's about building this long-term relationship. The question is always, I always like to think about it this way. I'm no business person by any means, but I like to think about it this way. Would you rather have a flash in the pan customer who wants to buy something for a lot for a really short time? Or would you want a customer who's long-term, who buys a little bit, but they're constantly buying things? That's the question. The question is do you want the quick buck or do you want the loyalty of an audience of somebody who's like, listen, I'm never going to use any other brand? You ask anybody about brand loyalty, it's because it's who they are. Again, it's weird. I like to think about this in terms of where I'm from, and I don't ketchup other than Heinz. I will not eat any other ketchup other than Heinz, all right? I refuse to do it. I will throw that other stuff away. The reason is because when I was a kid, that's all we ate. That's all we had. And you go in any restaurant, it's all Heinz because it's a brand loyalty that's like, hey, you know what? As a kid, it's my ketchup. I got to eat it. When I was a kid, they came out with the green and purple ketchup. You remember that? So I was like, you know what? It's kind of weird, but I like it. It's cool. Let's do it. It's ketchup. It's tomato paste and puree. Like, who cares, right? Like, it's not that big of a deal. But no, I want corn syrup in my ketchup. Tell me, come on. So that's the thing. It's one of the things where it's like, it takes a long time for people to become not just fans or not just purchasers of products, but long-term fans and long-term purchasers of products. We're not just talking about people who buy things. We're talking about people who continue to buy things from you. And that's the difference.
I could talk to you all day, just like I did for an hour and a half in the cafeteria at the college. That's not it. Bob, as we land the plane for this part of this conversation, what would you like to share? What would you like to ask J.C. that maybe I didn't hit on? But as we land the plane, I want to give you some space to help us get there safely.
This has got me thinking about so many different angles. And I'm thinking, I don't want it to seem negative because I'm thinking about the work that we do in thought leadership. And I think that the thing is, it doesn't have to take decades, but that most people, they're not going out on a limb and putting themselves out there in a way they should be. people have earned the credibility. Like there are CEOs out there, and I believe this firmly. There are CEOs out there who have been successful, lead large corporations that could stand up to the things they don't like happening in the United States right now and lead a coalition of people in a different direction. So it's not that it would take that leader decades to build their brand. They've just never taken their brand essentially public. They've never gone out into the world with their brand in a way that's different than, hunker down, lead your company, that kind of thing. So that's what I've been thinking about based on this, because it's not the only way to be successful is to spend a lot of money on advertising or billboards or something, or have decades to wait. It's that a lot of people just need to put themselves out into the arena. Like I think one of the things we always say, if there's a baseball game going on and you left your glove at home, you don't get to play. And if you don't get to play, you're not hitting the home run in the bottom of the ninth. So you have to have your glove to get out and be on the field to see maybe there's magic going to be happening. That's part of it with branding for organizations. You've got to get your reps and put yourself out there in a way through interesting content, interesting messaging to create those fans, super fans.
As powerful. JC, I'll give you the last word as we end our time together, and it won't be the last. I've been invited back. I'll be with you all at Coastal Carolina for Humanities Week. I couldn't be more excited. I'm pretty pumped about continuing to build a relationship with you all. What would you like to share that maybe I didn't ask, or that you want to leave the audience with about some of these topics of fandom and persuasion and brand building?
And the last thing I want to talk about is I'm really a big fit. So this community aspect is something that super important to me, because communities are so important for the vitality of our society, for us as humans. I mean, we're human beings. We are social creatures. This is how we have survived, is through groups, and it's through connection with other people. And when you think about sports, and again, I like thinking about sports always, sports and communities, I think about a quote. It's a quote from Jim Wexell from Rooney, A Sporting Life, that talks about sports. The city's sporting excellence was rooted in the sandlots that dotted Western Pennsylvania. That sporting life helped generations of men cope with their lives in the mills and mines at a time when Pittsburgh was still referred to as hell with the lid off. When you think about that, it's not about winning or losing. It's not about seeing the game. It's about going to a place and sharing 3 hours with people that you love in an environment that you're free from, am I going to have a steelworker accident today? Am I going to die in the mines? It's one of the things where it's like, this is part of who we are. This is who we are as people. And the reason that I always think about this in terms of Pittsburghers, right? The reason that we are the way that we are is because that's how we grew up. That's who we are. We are tough. We are hard-nosed. We like the cold. And the city and the team of the Steelers themselves, I think, are just such a perfect example of who we are as people. And that's true for everybody. I'm talking about myself as a Pittsburgher, but if you're from Boston, you love Boston. If you're from New York, you love your borough. If you're from any other place, you love the city that you're from because that's who you are. That's who you are. That's where you're born. That's where you're raised. If you're somebody who's kept their homestead there for a while, it's somebody that you can go back to and be like, hey, listen, this is where I am. That home, that feeling of comfort, whether that be sport, whether that be with community, whether that be with family, whatever that be, that feeling of comfort, I think, is something that is really important for a lot of people. And that's, in essence, why we love sports. That's why we love groups. That's why we like talking to people. And that's why we love doing what we do. That's why I love doing what I do.
JC, I'll let that be the last word. I am thankful for your time, appreciative of your knowledge, the passion that you share it, right? I'm very similar when I talk about business or leadership or different things. And it's cool as I kind of land the plane for us. We talked about that feeling of connection. We talked about that feeling of family feeling. And one of the things that has really stuck with me lately as I think about motivation to do things. We all need something to look forward to. And whether it's that football game, whether it's time off to read a book if you're not into sports, whether that is time to spend with your family or friends, drinking bourbon at a local bar, we all need something to look forward to that is outside of the daily grind of trying to take care of family, trying to pay a mortgage, trying to plan for the future. And I think that connectivity, when brands think about persuasion and marketing, how do you create a brand that always gives you something to look forward to? How do you create that experience? And so, Bob, JC, thank you very much for spending time with us. And this was a great discussion. I could talk to you all day, but we got to wind it at some point for editing purposes. But very, very glad to have spent time with you both.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, me too. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us on High Octane Leadership with Donald Thompson. Today's episode is a step in our collective journey towards leadership excellence. Remember, every story we share and every insight we gain is a piece in the puzzle of our leadership journey. For more insight and detail, hit the subscribe button so that we can stay connected. For deeper information and more episodes, go to donaldthompson.com. Continue to lead with vision and purpose, and until we meet again, embrace your role as a high-octane leader in the ever-evolving world of business.